Welcome to the Hollywood Scholar. I'm Jed Morgan, and The Witcher Season 3 Volume 2 is out, and everything that we could have predicted with Volume 1 is the case with Volume 2. It is just as horribly written, if not even more so horribly written, and it is just a cobbled together mess where time and distance mean nothing, logical story development means nothing, and character development is asinine and all over the place, focusing on girl power moments rather than actual plot development in any sort of logical manner. We have so much that isn't from the books, and the few things that are from the books are so warped and convoluted that they barely resemble the source material. Lauren Hissrich's comments that this season would be the most accurate to the book so far is an outright lie and provably false with everything that she's done in this season. This is not The Witcher. Henry Cavill's Geralt is not the main character of this season, and Volume 2 proves that even more, as he spends probably about 10 minutes on screen in episodes 2 and 3 of Volume 2. In episode 1 of Volume 2, he spends a little bit of time on it with very few action sequences. For those of you who don't know, in the books, the coup with Thanedd is an action-packed deal. Geralt is fighting through elves, Nilfgaardians, even some mages to get back to Ciri, ultimately fighting Vilgefortz in Tor Lara. But that's not the case at all. He barely fights anyone in the first episode of Volume 2. For the most part, he just stands back and watches Ciri be the bestest ever. But at this point, I've already reviewed episode 6 because I got early access on Tuesday. So if you've already seen that review, please skip to the timestamp down below. But if you haven't seen that review, continue on and watch the rest of my review of episode 6. It was supposed to be an action-packed episode that was going to blow people away with its spectacle. It was incredibly pathetic from a writing standpoint to an action standpoint. The coup at Thanedd, for which this episode is supposed to adapt in the books, is supposed to be a gritty affair, a heart-wrenching affair, and a very suspenseful one because it's a lot of different sides. There are a lot of different people competing. There's the Redanian side that's working with some sorcerers and sorceresses. There's the Scoia'tael, which are working for Nilfgaard. There's the Nilfgaardian sorcerer allies with Vilgefortz that are also there, as well as Ciri, Geralt, and Yennefer, who are trying to do their own thing. And the Scoia'tael just rampage through it, killing people room to room, and it's just pure chaos. Chaos is the way that I would describe the coup, at least the latter half of the coup, in Time of Contempt, the book that it's supposedly adapted from. In the show, they just casually walk into the Great Hall of Garstang Palace and just kind of stand across from each other, and it's like, we're preparing to fight. Let's line up perfectly, similar to Captain America's Civil War style. And that one, it at least made sense because they didn't want to fight each other. They tried to talk first. But this one, they're all set on killing each other, but they're going to line up, they're going to have their hero shots, and they're going to have terrible dialogue, and then sort of fight when these are sorcerers fighting a bunch of elves. Without the element of surprise, the Scoia'tael don't hold much of a shot against these unified sorcerers, but for some reason they have Dimertrillian arrows that pierce through most of the spells of the sorcerers and sorceresses. I've never seen that before, and the sorcerers, they seem to only realize that they have 1 or 2 spells. They've got shield and they've got force push. These sorcerers have an unlimited amount of spell potential, and 99% of the spells they use are push and shield. Come up with something interesting, Netflix. Come up with something that's more engaging. Come up with a fight scene that isn't pathetic. Even from a choreography standpoint, when it does get to hand, there's nothing interesting in this entire episode. But I want to go back to the beginning a little bit before I dive into the coup in much more detail. Overall, I want to highlight that the dialogue is just as weak as the rest of the season. If you're hoping for action, if you only watch The Witcher for action and has been disappointed by Volume 1 at this point, you will still be disappointed because Volume 2, the episode that's supposedly supposed to have the most action of the season thus far, doesn't deliver in the action standpoint whatsoever. So I imagine you will be disappointed as well. But that's enough of my initial thoughts. From here on out, there will be spoilers, so spoiler ahead. Now, the episode starts out with some weird sunlight scenes with Yennefer and Ciri both getting the sun in their eyes, and they're like, oh my god, the other one's in trouble. And then the sunlight also goes through the shed that Radovid and Jaskier just had sex in, and they look like they're going to betray each other. Radovid goes to try to kidnap Ciri, and Jaskier is really disappointed, sad that his gay lover tried to betray him. Oh, it's so sad. We get back to the palace, and Yennefer's managed to escape. All the other sorcerers who are working for Nilfgaard have captured the other sorcerers who either aren't working for Nilfgaard or Redania, as well as the ones who are working for Nilfgaard with Vilgefortz. But some reason, Yennefer goes into the depths of the palace to escape, and there is Lydia waiting for her. We don't really know why Lydia's there in this random spot, and happens to see Yennefer, who's got Geralt's sword for some stupid reason. In the books, she does not have Geralt's sword throughout of this. In fact, Geralt and Yennefer never see each other again from when Geralt wakes up in the middle of the night, as most of this episode should have taken place during, and he leaves to go investigate the sounds of the coup. That is the last time they see each other for several books. It's going to be a long time before Yennefer and Geralt see each other, but she's got Geralt's sword to give back to him later at an opportune fight. There's a fight, then for some reason Lydia is so powered up that Yennefer just gets her ass handed to her. She's about to die, and Triss comes in to save the day and helps her kill Lydia with some vines. That is all over the place, because at this point in the books, Triss is working with the Redanian intelligence, with Eitr, with Philippa, to root out the traitors that have aligned themselves with Nilfgaard. But for some reason, she's not aligned with anyone in this. She's helping Yennefer escape, which none of this is in the books. Throughout this whole fight sequence, Geralt is just casually walking around with Dijkstra and Philippa, who have brought all the captured sorcerers together and depowered them using Dimmerilian handcuffs. And they're just talking. Philippa's like, this is a purge. We are getting rid of the traitors. Geralt hopes it's a trial. It's not, and they have some really bad dialogue revealing who the big villain is. And Tissaia realizes that they're going to try to kill her boyfriend, who's not her boyfriend in the books. Tissaia and Vilgefortz are not a couple, at least that we know of, in the books. And in this conversation, we find out that portals are sometimes okay. They mention that on this island in Garstang Palace, that people have been teleporting out all the time. That Vilgefortz has been teleporting out, and for some reason, the Redanian intelligence has record of portals. So portals are okay here, and later on we actually see portals being used, but they're always the evil portals of Vilgefortz. But for those of you who don't know, and they mention it later on in the episode, because of the existence of Torlar, which is a teleportation tower at the edge of the island, it prevents teleportation and portals on the island. And apparently they kept with that only for the normal portals, and that's why they created all the evil portals, so that they could still have the contrivances of portals but not contradict the source material in that way. So apparently that's why we have all the evil portals throughout the season, is so that Vilgefortz can push Istrid away and send him through a portal later on and do a bunch of other portal related stuff. It's really weird. That's not a good enough justification for evil portals, just to make your writing easier for you, Netflix. At this point, Geralt looks out the window and sees that there's fog rolling into the island, which shouldn't be the case. At this point in the books, the Scoia'tael have already snuck into the palace and are hiding in the wine cellars beneath the palace. And Francesca, who isn't a villain at this point, at least we don't know she's a villain until this moment, when she's released by Tissaia, Francesca goes and gets them, and the Scoia'tael start rampaging throughout the palace. In this one, apparently there's going to be a Redanian army coming, as well as the Nilfgaardian troops with the Scoia'tael, who are dressed in Nilfgaardian armor. Specifically, Francesca is wearing Nilfgaardian armor. It looks terrible. The Scoia'tael in general look terrible, but for some reason, they're being clouded by fog as they're rolling in ships to the island. Instead of already being there, they're sailing in on ships covered by fog, which doesn't make any sense. If this had taken place at night, you could have even had them sail under the cover of darkness without the fog, or they could have already been there. But the fog, it's so blatantly magically created that you don't need Geralt to say that it's weird. Everybody who looks at it is like, yeah, that's not natural. There's definitely something hiding in there. It's so incredibly stupid. This is an example of a change from the books that is just so asinine that I can't believe they did it. Moving on a little bit, Tissaia frees all the captured sorcerers and sorceresses, which leads to Vilgefortz going down to the Great Hall where the dance took place in the last episode, and freeing the Scoia'tael and letting them into the palace through some weird wall change secret passage thing. And during this, he has one of the most terrible villain reveal speeches ever. He's just casually like, Tissaia, I never loved you, you're pathetic, you're really sad, why are you here? And just blatantly turning Tissaia so against him. It's so unnecessary and written like a toddler who doesn't understand why people don't like each other and what love is. It's horrendously written on a myriad of levels. Now, something very important happens here. In the books, Filavandrel is primarily only in the short story, which we saw in season 1 with him, where he was introduced, and then later on he goes and visits Francesca in Doblathana after she becomes the queen of there. He shouldn't be here at all, and he is one of the last high kings. He is supposed to be a little bit above the normal elf. He's supposed to be something important, something that Geralt respects very deeply for what he is. But he's in this scene just to kill him off. just to kill him off. Tasaya sends some sort of bolt at Francesca, which is gonna kill him. He jumps in the way, and he just explodes, splatters the boys style, just his blood all over Francesca in one of the most violent displays we've seen in this show thus far. They do not treat Philavandrel like this. That is wrong to treat a character like him with such a casual end. And yes, Francesca's upset about it, but it's very, very disappointing to see Philavandrel die like this. Going back to Yennefer, she makes her way out of the palace, out what looks like over 20 miles. She is very, very far from the palace at this point, and she meets up with Ciri in the middle of nowhere on this massive island, and they just happen to find each other. Magic might have done it, I'll forgive that, but they find each other so far from the palace, and Ryans also finds them at this random spot on the island. Instead of fighting Ryans in an epic wizard's duel, Yennefer's just like, "Aw, Ciri, he's been badgering you. You take this one. You take this fight." So she just casually stands there as Ciri charges Ryans with the sword. Yes, Ciri should be quite competent with the sword at this point. Not amazing, but even still, she's a child going up against a sorcerer, which he has a little bit of magical training, but nowhere near enough to fight any sorcerer. She's barely a novice when it comes to her magical uses. She should not have a chance in hell in a fight against Ryans. But Yennefer is just like, "You go, girl!" And Ciri immediately cuts off Ryan's hands, and then he starts to look like he's winning. Yennefer is like, "All right, I'm gonna take out Geralt's sword, I'm gonna surrender," and then she throws it expertly past Ryan's to Geralt, who somehow snuck up behind a sorcerer and immediately cuts off his head. That is the big climactic action fight sequence to end Ryan's story in the TV show. Ryan's doesn't die at this point in the books, but apparently Geralt sneaks up on him and cuts off his head, and it's really pathetic. They wanted this show to be action-packed. That's what a lot of people loved about Season 1. Even people who didn't think the scripts for Season 1 were that good, they said, hey, the action is still great. I still love the action and the fight sequences. I agree with that. In the first episode, Geralt's fight with Renfri's henchman and later on with Renfri is incredibly well choreographed. That quality is no longer present in Season 3 at all, because any fight scene that lasts longer than 2 seconds is choreographed like someone who's never picked up a sword before. There is no good choreography in this episode whatsoever. At this point, Yennefer realizes that she has to go help her friends, which is what it is in the books, but Ciri realizes this as well and says, "No, you have to go. Oh, you love Tasaya. You can't let your friend die." And it's this like 3-minute speech from Ciri about how she needs to go, and Geralt's like, "No, we've only just found each other." Some really terrible dialogue, a way stretched out sequence. Yennefer could have just been like, "I can't leave them. You guys are safe. You guys get out of here. I'm gonna go back and help." That's 2 seconds, not 3 minutes of this. And Yennefer decides, all right, I'm going to jog back the 20 miles I just ran back to the palace. It's insane how far away she is, which is important for later. Then we cut back to the fight scene that's happening in the Great Hall, which is the culmination of the coup. It's just this one room where everyone's lining up and fighting each other. And these two soldiers from Nilfgaard, they attach their hilts together. And I mean that literally. Their swords, one of them puts his sword up like this, the other one smashes down like this, and it becomes a double-sided sword like Darth Maul. But not just one of them takes it. If he just passed it off to one dude and he was wielding a double-sided sword, alright, fine. But they both stay holding their own hilts. So these two dudes are holding a connected sword trying to fight someone like that. It's insane and so impractical. What were they thinking with that prop? They probably thought it was epic, and it would have been decently epic if it was just one dude connecting these swords and wielding them. But two dudes wielding a two-bladed sword is insane, utterly pointless and impractical to such a degree that is laughable and farcical. At this point, Tasaya has enough of the bloodshed. She is pissed off after her lover, Vilgefortz, betrayed her and led to this utter slaughter. So she's going up to higher in the castle tower above the Great Hall where she's looking down on everyone down there, and she's enacting what's called Alzur's lightning. And for some reason this spell channels lightning through Torlara, then through Tasaya, and then she's able to zap everyone down in the Great Hall, killing a bunch of them, regardless of their side. And then later on, they're like, oh, it'll kill anyone she lays her eyes on, trying to explain away why she's actively trying to kill even her own allies. But that doesn't work because we see her own allies frantically diving for cover, putting up shields, in a lot of trouble here. So she's just casually killing everyone, even though they try to explain it away. Tasaya went full evil mode. She went full I'm killing everyone mode. And this lasts for a while. This lightning that she does lasts for quite a long time. And then it suddenly ends. and the people downstairs who have survived get back up together, line up one more time, and get ready for another fight. But when Yennefer goes up to Tissaia at this point, a little bit later on, she's still channeling the lightning, and it's still going away from her. It's still leaving her body, but it's not hurting anyone downstairs, so the spell doesn't end till there. That's really, really odd. Now, important thing to note here was when the Scoia'tael arrived, Cahir arrived with them, which is accurate to the books. Cahir is here at this point in the books. It should be the only part of the season that he's a part of. It's the only part of books he appears in, and he goes off to chase Ciri. But more importantly, right before that, he meets up with Fringilla, who is for some reason fighting with the Scoia'tael. Now, I may have missed something, so if I did miss it in volume 1 of season 3, please absolutely correct me. But last time I remember seeing Fringilla, she was drunk in a tavern. She wasn't teaming up with Francesca. She wasn't teaming up with the Nilfgaardians. How did she know this was taking place? And how did she incorporate herself into the Scoia'tael attack? How did any of that happen? And even still, Cahir doesn't know that Fringilla is alive. They end up next to each other during the fight, during the lightning, and he's like, oh my god, Fringilla, you're alive. And she's like, yeah, it's crazy what you can do when you can think for yourself, even though she's doing what Ymir wants. She's helping Ymir, but she's telling Cahir, don't help Ymir, but I'm doing it anyway. It's insane. Why is Fringilla here? There's no reason she should be here. It's not that the Nilfgaardians recruited her, because Cahir, the leader of the Nilfgaardian band there, doesn't know she's there, and it doesn't look like Francesca knows anymore. So Fringilla, we went from seeing her drunk in a tavern, suddenly appears with everybody, and is all gung-ho to help, but casually makes remarks about, you shouldn't help Ymir. It's insane and illogical, and I can't piece together the pieces. It's illogical to the 9th degree, but Cahir gets away from the fight, he starts chasing Ciri, and he randomly, on this big-ass island, after tons of miles, because they're far away from the palace still, remember how far Yennefer had to run, he catches up to Geralt and Ciri. How does he know where they are? How does he get that far that fast? Faster than they got that far? And Cahir fights Ciri for a little bit, but he's like, no, I will not fight you. Here, kill me. And he tries to put Ciri's sword in his neck and say, I'd be glad if yours the last face I saw. It's so weird. But suddenly some Scoia'tael show up and he's like, oh my god, I will defend you. And he goes to fight the people that he invaded the palace with. It is such a quick turn. That's something that happens a lot in this episode, is allegiances change on a dime for virtually no reason whatsoever. And it's pure chaos. Chaos. From a character standpoint, from a motivation standpoint. There's that sequence. Then back at the Great Hall where the fight is taking place, Yennefer arrives and is able to save some of their lives as Francesca's going gun-ho. She wants to kill Tissaia for killing Filavandrel. She made it that far, and Cahir made it all the way out there in the span of 5 minutes. And they show consistently they're not skipping time during this fight. The fight is happening in consistent order. Unless Tissaia is sending lightning to the Great Hall for several hours and everyone's just hunkered down waiting for the lightning to end. Unless that happens, no. Yennefer was able to run really far and Cahir was able to run really far. Incredible distances, and they never ever explain it. And if you're in the chat, it's like, oh, but there's magic, there's teleportation. Nuh-uh. In just a minute here, Philippa says they can't portal out of here. She has to help Dijkstra walk out of the palace and get far enough away that they can create a portal, which is how it was in the books. So evil portals, okay, but their portal's still not okay, so they have to get far enough away. And so how did Yennefer get so far twice, all the way away from the palace to meet with Ciri, then all the way back to help the sorcerers and sorceresses in the final push of the coup? And how is Cahir able to do the exact same thing? The time and distance of this episode make no more sense than it has the entire show thus far. Stregobor, who has been imprisoned because of his racist intentions to experiment on elven girls that we discovered in the last episode, he somehow escaped from whatever prison he was in, and he's just, oh my god, I'm gonna kill some elves. He's not concerned about the sorcerers and sorceresses who locked him up. He's using fire magic, and he's gonna kill all the Scoia'tael because he hates elves. And he lets them escape. He's building a fire magic, and everyone's screaming, oh my god, he's wielding fire magic. And the sorcerers and sorceresses are able to escape, but the elves don't do anything. They don't go anywhere. They just hang out and wait for Stregobor to blow them up when Tissaia and Yennefer are strategically looking down at them at the high level so we can see what happened. It's ridiculous. Why is he here? How is he here? And we saw Yennefer use fire magic earlier on in this episode, or what appeared to be. Please correct me if I'm wrong, if I missaw that. But in previous seasons, we've seen Yennefer use fire magic. It's not a thing in the books. Fire magic being evil is not something from the books. Yes, fire magic is incredibly difficult and hard to use, and Ciri is too much of a novice, like I mentioned in the fight with Ryans, to wield it, which we'll see in the next episode or the episode after that of this season. but a more experienced sorcerer like Stregobor or sorceress like Yennefer should be able to wield it no problem. But, oh my god, Stregobor's gotten fire, and he ends the coup. He kills all the elves, and that's the coup at Thanon. A great hall fight where people line up and push shield over and over again with magic arrows that pierce through the shield, and choreography out of a high school play. That's the coup at Thanon, the big climactic event, this epic adventure, this episode, which is going to be the set piece of the season. That's what we get. That's all we get. At this point, Geralt and Ciri, with Cahir fighting behind them, covering their escape, make it to a boat on the shoreline of the island, and they're going to try to row it away. But suddenly, Geralt senses that Vilgefortz is here. And he's like, run, Ciri. Instead of getting Ciri in the boat and at least casting her off, saying get away from the island, which would have been the smart thing to do, he says, just run. Doesn't tell her where to go, doesn't say, hey, Tor Lara is a good idea or anything like that. And then when he walks in to see Vilgefortz, Vilgefortz's like, you know where she's going, right? Tor Lara. It's like, no, if you put her in a boat like an intelligent person, she'd be off the island. And that's something that we see throughout this entire episode, is back when Cahir fought Ciri, Geralt stood there and did nothing. He did the exact same thing Yennefer did in the fight with Ryan's, where he's just like, oh, you go, girl. Oh, this guy's been chasing you for a long time. You have fun. This is your moment. And he literally just stands there and does not raise a weapon. And you might think, oh, Cahir had no intentions of hurting her. How does Geralt know that? There is no reasonable explanation to explain why Geralt knows that Cahir will not hurt Ciri in this instance. It's moronic. Geralt acts like a complete moron throughout the entire run of this episode. And when he's talking to Vilgefortz, the dialogue is so atrocious. They're both just generic, you will join me, I will never join you. Really pathetic stuff that doesn't fit, and they keep fighting and talking at the same time, and it's so drawn out that Rachel, who was watching it with me, was saying, just fight already. The dialogue was dragging out so much that we were bored. It felt like the longest hour of my life, and this big climactic fight, which is supposed to end the episode, that is supposed to bring things home and show Geralt at his weakest, is so boring and uninteresting, even from a choreography standpoint, that we were struggling to even pay attention. And of course, just like in the books, Vilgefortz kicks Geralt's ass, completely annihilates him, breaks his back, breaks his leg, and leaves him on the shore of the island, which is not where he left him in the books. In the books, it was in the entryway to Tor Lara, I believe, and Tissaia and Triss found him and helped get him off the island, got him far away that Triss could teleport him to Brokilon to be healed. But he just is left on the shore, and for some reason, in just a moment here, the tide's gonna come up so fast that he's dragged out into the water, where he's floating. That's not how tides work. They can't come in that fast. Just like we saw with everyone suddenly appearing 20 miles away, then back and forth with the palace. The time isn't consistent, because we saw in the tower things are happening 1 second to 1 second to 1 second, and then we cut back to Geralt right away, who's floating out in the sea. It's insane. But Vilgefortz makes it to the tower and up to where Ciri is at the top of the tower, which isn't something that happens in the books, and she's activating the monolith that's in the tower. Again, they're pushing this monolith crap. There's not a monolith inside of Tor Lara. It's Tor Lara itself that is magical. It's not just encasing a magical stone. And Ciri is entranced by it. Vilgefortz's like, you cannot control the power, you are not ready. We shall rule the continent together. And some really terrible dialogue. Then there's a flash of light. Ciri vanishes. The tower explodes. Vilgefortz looks like he's gonna die. He's not dead, but it looks like he is. And the tower collapses, revealing the monolith standing on its own. Screw the monolith. Screw the book that Vilgefortz got earlier in the episode, which is from Blood Origin. And it's just a mess. This is not how things played out in the books. Gracefully, we move on to episode 7, which is more boring than episode 6, but I would say it's not quite as bad because it doesn't destroy the characters to the same degree. It doesn't annihilate the canon. It's not full as much garbage and nonsensical time and distance as episode 6 was. But episode 7 and episode 8, for that matter, are incredibly boring. I have so few thoughts on episode 7 and 8 of season 3. For episode 6, I had massive amounts of comments. I had lots of notes that made that review 25 minutes long. For these, I have maybe a line or two per episode. So these last 2 episodes I will get through very quickly. Starts out with Jaskier and Radovid waking up after having gay sex, and Jaskier being disappointed that Radovid was perhaps there the whole time just to get Ciri, and apparently Dijkstra was trusting Radovid to do that, because later on he's like, the girl will be brought to us. It seems like he trusted Radovid to bring Ciri to him. That's insane. What we've seen of Dijkstra and Radovid, there's no way that he would trust Radovid whatsoever. So it's a whole bunch of mess with that. Ciri ends up in the Korath Desert, which is the Witcher's equivalent of the Sahara Desert, and she's trying to survive there. It's super, super boring. There's this weird cream that she has in her pocket for some reason that she starts rubbing all over her sunburns halfway through the first day that she's there, and then she starts licking it out of the can. It's just a really awkward looking scene, and she starts singing this song called Little Sacrifice, and it's a reference to one of the short stories that we should have gotten in season 1, and apparently we're going to be getting that short story in the upcoming animated movie Sirens of the Deep, where they can't tell the difference between a siren and a mermaid, and it's a little reference to that. It comes out of nowhere, and it misinterprets the very point of that short story. In the song, it's just really horrifically done, and then Ciri randomly comes across this pool of goo, and apparently it's sand monster saliva that she's crawling through, and then the unicorn shows up, distracts Ciri long enough that the monster tries to attack, Ciri gets out of the way, and then the monster leaves. So initially I thought, this is the sand monster from the books? No, it's a completely different sand monster. We've got 2 separate sand monsters and 2 separate monster attacks in this episode. What is going on here? And they're both 2 seconds long at most. The later one is even more insane than this one, but we're starting off very, very strong with this initial monster attack. Following on from there, the majority of the episode is spent with Ciri in the desert, having visions of previous events in the show, perhaps events coming up. She's starting to have visions of her mother and her grandmother. It's not very well put together. The writing is all over the place. At one point in these 2 episodes, Ciri has a vision of her grandmother Calanthe, and she starts criticizing Calanthe for just being as bad as all the bad men and killing the elves. She shouldn't have been doing that because she's killing Ciri. Ciri's got elven blood, forgetting that Ciri got her elven bloodline through the maternal line, through Calanthe herself. So Calanthe's also killing her own bloodline if that's what Ciri's going for. It's a bad argument meant to paint Calanthe in a weird light. It's just really poorly done. And that's before Falka ultimately shows up, which is the personification of Ciri's evil magic. It's done very differently in the books. In the books, Falka, at least a sort of vision of Falka, doesn't appear until after Ciri starts to use fire magic. In this, it's well before that, and it's a hallucination brought on by the desert, but it's also the same voice actress as the glowing orb thing that kind of looks like a Jinn from Blood Origin that was manipulating Baelor, and it looks like is going to be leading the Wild Hunt going forward because the Wild Hunt live in the same world as this orb. So that's what I believe is this weird orb from Blood Origin is actively coming to manipulate Ciri, but they don't say it. The problem is, with this Falka stuff, they spend the entire time talking about powerful women. Powerful women have always been held back because of their strength. And they're trying to make this parallel between Falka and Ciri. Falka is a terrible person in the books. Yes, some people believe that she might not actually be that bad. Specifically, Philippa believes that her reputation is falsely labored upon her. And it's just she lost control of a mob. But for the most part, people view her similar to how we view Hitler from roughly 100 years before. He's seen as one of the most violent people in our recent memory. She's responsible for the most death. That's what Falka is in the land of the continent. But for some reason, Ciri, knowing all of that, is relating to her, and if this is the orb from Blood Origin, decides that Falka is the best image to show Ciri, and this is the most intersectional, left-wing, woke part of this series thus far, which is quite impressive. It's literally all about, Ciri, you've been abused by men. Oh, men are so evil. We need to be powerful women. You need to break the system. They say system several times. I don't think system is a word that particularly works in a fantasy setting, especially in one that comes off incredibly political. It doesn't seem to work in context. It just comes off as pure, unadulterating, modern third-wave feminist messaging and not anything that should be happening within The Witcher, within a fantasy alternate reality show. And that's all the sequence is with Falka, is feminism, 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 feminism. It's aggressive with how much it goes with Ciri. You've got to change the world. You've got to break the system. And they even steal a bunch from Game of Thrones because their spokes on a wheel is just turning over and over. Bad men abusing powerful women over and over again. Ciri, you must break the wheel, break the system, break the patriarchy. They don't say patriarchy, but that's what they're implying. And that's very much a line of dialogue that Daenerys has many, many times in Game of Thrones. We got to break the wheel. We're in this constant cycle. And it's also very similar to the Wheel of Time. With my limited knowledge of Wheel of Time, never read the books, but from what I know, it's very similar to that as well. So they're stealing from that, and in the very episode title of episode 7, is out of the frying pan into the fire, which is a direct quote from The Hobbit. So they're stealing from both Hobbit and Game of Thrones here. And that's not even the worst episode title. I didn't mention it in my episode 6 review, but the episode 6 is called Everybody Has a Plan Till They Get Punched in the Face. These are great episode titles, just incredible episode titles that aren't stealing from anything, not at all, not at all. But at this point, after a few visions with Falca, with Calanthe, with her mother Pavetta, a second sand monster attacks, and attacks the unicorn as well. And it's really, really bad. Ciri literally climbs up on this rocky monster, rips off part of its rocky body, and is holding it, and it's nearly as big as her. It's as big as her torso, this giant piece of rock armor that she pulled off this monster, and she runs in and bashes the monster's brain in with this piece of rock. She is a midget. I mean, yes, she's young, she's a girl, yes, she's supposed to be this small, but she cannot pick up this giant piece of rock. It comes off as incredibly distracting because it's insane. It's utterly and completely insane. But luckily, after a few little other things, the episode comes to a close. And as you may have noticed, I didn't mention Henry Cavill for the most part in that entire review, because he's barely in it. He's in virtually a coma, just mumbling throughout the whole thing as Jaskier tries to find him, eventually finding him. Milva's kind of around, and they're introducing her character. For those of you who don't know, Milva becomes relatively a main character starting with the next book and the next season, but they're stealing a lot from that book to fill out the end of this season. And we move on to the next episode where we get to know Milva a lot more. We get a better look at her. She's a forest woman. She lives in the forest. She's a hunter. She barely leaves Brocculon, only to get news and trade if she needs to. Why is she wearing armor to begin with? At all. Especially a giant-ass breastplate that looks terrible. Why would you want to climb trees in a breastplate that large? It's huge. I was one of the few people in my watch along with a bunch of other creators who was hyper-focusing on this breastplate because it looked so big. It was weird. Milva is aggressively terrible in these 2 episodes. She's a bitch. She's constantly berating Geralt, and she's just aggressively antagonistic to everyone she comes across. That's not Milva. Milva's kind of a cute, shy girl who's kind of got a little girly crush on Geralt, but she's not, oh my god, you be dead now. Oh, you worthless. I hate everyone. I hate you. She is so distracting. The panel who was watching with me would literally groan every time she came on screen because of how annoying she was. In a show full of annoying, pointless characters, Milva really takes the cake, at least for this volume, in its entirety. We get a bunch of stuff with Yennefer gathering the Lodge of Sorceresses, eventually founding them. It looks like, they don't say the word Lodge of Sorceress, but it looks like she's starting that, even though that's not what she's doing. She takes a random side quest to the Skellige Isles to talk to Krakon Crate, really not giving us any information that we need to know, and it's focusing more on Yennefer than Geralt and Ciri we don't really see again until the end of the episode. So why are we doing any of this? Yes, Geralt trains a little bit, he's getting ready to go after Ciri. Yennefer even goes to see Geralt, but it looks like a vision, and then she's telling stuff that only Yennefer would know, and it's all over the place. Is this a vision? Is this a projection? Is this just in his head? They don't explain it. But Yennefer shouldn't see Geralt at all. She shouldn't have seen him really that much in episode 6 even. They don't see each other for full books at this point. They don't see each other for a long time. But of course they changed that all. And at this point we see Fringilla go back to Emhyr. And the last time they were together, he arrested her and sentenced her to virtual death, being the wine taster for him. They specifically say the Emperor's wine tester, but it must have been for the entire court because she's perpetually drunk with 7 other people who are all dying of alcohol poisoning. She nearly dies. She fakes her death to escape, which is insane. And then she goes and gets drunk in a tavern, and she somehow finds out about the conclave. She hears the conclave is happening, but she somehow finds out about the Scoia'tael attack, when they're attacking, how they're attacking, the secret passage they're using. She decides to go help them because she hates her uncle, but she's helping Emhyr, and she gives Cahir advice. Is like, you need to think for yourself, even though I'm still doing what my boss said. I'm strong, independent, but still doing what I'm told. It's really weird. And when she goes back to Emhyr at this episode, he forgives her and is immediately like, you know, death suits you, but so would a governorship. And he makes her a governor of one of the vassal states that he conquers during the initial invasion of this 2nd volume. It doesn't make any sense. Fringilla should have been cut out of the season entirely. From a book standpoint, she shouldn't even be until season 4. That's when we should meet Fringilla. But apparently we've got to have this girl boss stuff that doesn't make any sense and should be cut out in its entirety. This is when we get to a slight book accurate thing, very, very slight. Tasaya takes her own life, and that is what happens in the books. The motivations and why she did it is quite different, but it still ultimately ends up the same, where she takes her own life. But Yennefer wasn't there, and they're just trying to hyperinflate this character to such a degree that it doesn't make sense, and we rolled our eyes when she died. It's not all that impactful of a death, but somebody else dies as well. Philippa comes back to Tredegor, the capital of Redania, with Dijkstra, and they're starting to plot a little bit. Dijkstra is sad and pathetic, and he's like, Philippa, the king wants me to frame everything that went bad at Thanedd on you and kill you, but put it on me, kill me. And he hands her a dagger and he's like, I'm so sad and pathetic, kill me, I'm just sad and broken. And he starts sobbing. He's like, I trust you with my life, Dijkstra, but not with my schemes. I've made plans for both of us. And she's going all evil mode, and her weird girlfriend kills the king of Redania, and you know, she's in charge now. She's powerful. Yes, the king does die at this point in the books, but it's just so poorly done. They're degrading Dijkstra. They're degrading Geralt to hyperinvade these female characters that are uninteresting in their entirety. Now we go back to Nilfgaard at this point, where fake Ciri is introduced to Emhyr. They don't set this up at all. They don't mention that they've got a fake Ciri. They don't mention anything like that. And in the books, I believe they were in a private chamber when Emhyr met this fake Ciri, and he immediately recognized her because, rightfully so, he has the people who brought her to him executed, and he puts a bounty out on the lives of Rience, I believe, and Cahir, and saying, they failed me. Now, go capture them because they failed me. And he's still going to go along with this fake Ciri. He's still going to pretend that it's the real Ciri, but he knows it's not true. In this one, fake Ciri that we saw in episode 2 randomly shows up, no way knowing of how she got into the Nilfgaardian hands, because Geralt was protecting her until he suddenly forgot about her. And she's here suddenly in a big courtroom scene. There's thousands, maybe hundreds of people here watching as she's dramatically walked down the aisle of the throne room to Emhyr, and he doesn't look like he doesn't know that it's a false Cirilla. He doesn't look like he knows that it's a subterfuge. And he's like, welcome, Cirilla, princess. And it's a big dramatic moment, but you don't get any knowledge of what's going on, how this happened, why it's happening, what's the import of this situation. It's just spectacle with zero substance. And luckily we're coming to one of the final scenes of the episode and the season as a whole. Since the last time I spoke about Ciri, Little Horse was damaged in that fight with the sand monster, and she needs to tap into fire magic to save Little Horse's life. Falca's pushing her on. Falca forces a vision on her. It's creepy, it's weird, and she eventually renounces her fire magic and her magic in general and passes out before some trappers find her and take her to a nearby village where she meets up with some of the rats. The fight sequence with the rats is insane. It's all over the place. The shaky cam is so bad that I can't tell if any of the choreography is good. And then for some inexplicable reason, Missile decides, you know what, this last surviving trapper and Ciri need to have a duel. We're going to give them both weapons and watch them fight, and it's going to be awesome. Missile, who should never have met Ciri before the scene, but for some reason was artificially inserted into episode 2 or 3 early on this season, decides to do this, and Ciri just plays with the dude, easily destroying him in combat. Now, at this point, Ciri should be very good with the sword. She's going to start training with Bonar in the fighting pit, being his prisoner in the next season, but it wasn't earned. It doesn't feel earned watching her kick this guy's ass. It doesn't feel earned at all. And it's just boring. We're waiting for the episode to end. She beats him, and the rats go off on their own. She calls herself Falca for the first time. It's really embarrassing. During all this, they've been cutting in stuff from Baptism of Fire, the initial story with Geralt in that book, into this one, but they don't finish out Ciri's story in this actual book. The first rat she meets, the one who is imprisoned by the trappers as well, attempts to sexually assault her, but Missile stops him and then takes Ciri's flesh as payment. So she stops the sexual assault, and then she sexually assaults Ciri in payment for stopping the initial sexual assault. That's pretty well how Ciri's story ends in this book. But they cut out all that because you can't have a negatively shown lesbian relationship. They're probably just going to be already in a relationship in the next season, and it's going to be good and peachy, and they're not going to mention how Stockholm Syndrome-y the relationship between Ciri and Missile is in the books. They're just going to go straight into, oh, aren't they such cute lesbians? The final thing that I want to mention is how Geralt's story ends, how Henry Cavill's story ends in the Witcher universe in this season, because this is the last scene that we see of Henry Cavill in the role of Geralt. From interviews that we have with some of the producers, we know that they're going to be using lore to explain the recast. They're not going to James Bond it. They're not going to Marvel it where they just kind of ignore it and move forward with Liam Hemsworth. They're going to explain it, specifically most likely with the multiverse, according to one of the producers. Do they set that up at all? Do they give Geralt an epic send-off as Henry Cavill? No, he's just leaving Brokilon with Jaskier, and he fights some Nilfgaardians. It's a decent enough fight, but he does a lot of stupid things. Like when he's getting ready to fight, he gives Jaskier his sword, so he goes into the fight unarmed for no apparent reason. He fights him, and then Milva has to come in and save the day because you can't have Geralt have his own moment. After everything he's been through, after how much Netflix has abused Henry Cavill, they could not give him an entire scene that was focused just on him. Milva just had to swoop in and save the day. Then they take some horses and they walk off into the distance as we fade back to the scene I just mentioned with Ciri. That is the last that we see of Henry Cavill as Geralt of Rivia. It's embarrassing. Netflix should be embarrassed of themselves, and I can't wait to find out what the viewership numbers for this volume is, because we know between episode 1 and episode 5 of volume 1, the viewership dropped by 60%. I just can't imagine how bad the viewership numbers will be for volume 2, because volume 2 is worse than volume 1. I didn't think it was possible. I didn't think that volume 1 could possibly be more accurate to the books than volume 2, but that is the case. Volume 2 is so much worse. I can't even give this volume a 1 out of 10. I can't do it. It is just that bad. I can't give it a score at all. It's somewhere between 0 and 0.5, maybe. There's nothing to like about it. I can't think of a single thing that I even liked about this season. It is an atrocity. It is an affront to The Witcher. It is embarrassing, the treatment that Henry Cavill had in this season. He was sad and pathetic and sidelined throughout the entirety of it. Ciri was girl-bossed on so many different occasions. From the conversation with Falco, versus we're just powerful women put down by men. You got to break the patriarchy to win on 2 separate occasions. Yennefer just stands there and lets her fight Riot, to when Geralt just stands there and lets her fight Cahir. She's the best as ever, and they're not even questioning it at this point. It's embarrassing. That is how I want to title this review. That is the word that I want viewers to take away from this review. It is embarrassing what Netflix has done, what Lauren Hissrich has done to this beautiful franchise, and these incredible characters that I love so much. They should be ashamed of themselves and never ever work in Hollywood or any sort of entertainment property again. That is The Witcher Season 3, Volume 2. It is an atrocity. If you haven't seen it, please do not watch it. Your sanity will thank you. But anyway, that's all I have for today. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Anon.
Hey, yo, are you feeling what I'm doing up in here? Oh, I know you are. Do you miss all the good, compelling stories that we used to get back in Hollywood that they ain't putting down no more? Oh, I know you missing it. So check out my book series, Odyssey of a Phoenix, a mythological epic about philosophy, morality, and modern-day mental illness issues, baby. Book 1, Down in Flames. Book 2, Apocalypse Then. These are currently on sale. What are you waiting for? Get your hands on them. And we got Book 3, Kill the Dark, is coming down the pipeline. Just wait for all the good stuff that's dropping. You ain't gonna be disappointed, fam.